Let's go ahead and grab our Bibles tonight. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. Last Sunday afternoon, we started up kind of going in particular, specifically over some of the different dispensations. We started with the very first one, which is the dispensation of innocence I have way over there at the other side of the board. We don't know how long that one lasted because we don't know how long Adam and Eve were in the garden before they sinned. But after they sinned, basically the dispensation of innocence goes from creation to condemnation, if you want to call it that. That's the fall of man. So however long it was between Adam and Eve being created and their fall from God, that happened whenever they disobeyed the one commandment that God gave them. That was the test, was don't eat of that one particular fruit. The failure of them was they ate the fruit. The judgment, remember, that was a cursed ground. They had a harder life. They had separation from God. But the grace being shown was God did not kill them physically, and God provided a sacrifice to take their place to cover their sins. That was the animals that he skinned to make those clothes of covering for them. But we're going to continue on to the next dispensation. We're doing this because the Bible tells us in 2 Timothy 2:15, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And if we could understand how God deals with people differently during different time periods, then it'll help us understand our Bible. It'll help us understand where we're at now and the things to come, because the whole reason we're going over dispensations is because we're wanting to do an end-time prophecy study. But if you don't know the beginning, you're not really going to understand the end. So we start in the beginning. That's where the Bible starts. So this dispensation that we're going to hit next, as I get mad and throw markers, it's my rage. I'm trying to control it. This second one, I'm doing not too bad. Yeah, just don't ask my wife. Second dispensation we're going to be going over is that of conscience. Consciences. Just one I, not two. E-N-C-E? That sounds about right. The dispensation of conscience. This takes effect once Adam and Eve partook of the fruit. They gained the knowledge of good and evil. That's what that tree promised them. That's what the tree provided for them. And so now they have this knowledge and this ability to know good and evil. Let's the books associated with this dispensation of conscience is from Genesis 3:6 roundabouts to the end of the flood. So I'm gonna say it's from the fall to the flood. Okay. From the fall to the flood. The first one is creation to condemnation. Fall to the flood. That started at about 4004 BC. I wasn't there, but that's the usual dates that they give. To 2348 BC, because that's how specific they are. 2348. All right, give or take a few. If you want to argue about it, don't argue with me, because I don't care. That's let you know pretty close. Okay, so it's about 1656 years is the age range that we're going through on this dispensation. Let's see, called conscience. Why are we calling it conscience? Conscience. That's why we're calling it conscience. Con means with, science means knowledge. They ate of the tree. Now they have the knowledge of good and evil. Now they're with that knowledge. In the garden with the Lord, they didn't have the knowledge of evil. All they knew was a good thing. So now they're with knowledge, both of good and evil. That's why we're calling it the dispensation of conscience. All right, let's start in Genesis 3, verse 6. Let's look at the beginning here of this dispensation. Genesis 3:6, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. I had one of my kids come up and say, "How'd they sew the fig leaves together?" Oh no, maybe a vine or something. I wasn't there, but they were quite thrifty from the get-go. You understand that we are much worse off mentally, physically, and every other way than what we were whenever Adam and Eve were created. They get kicked out of the garden. You read your Bible, they go out and start building cities. Who taught them how to do that? They they just that smart. We're de-evolving. We're not evolving and getting better. We're degrading. Okay, we're getting worse. But once the fruit was eaten, we got man had the knowledge to know both good and evil. Man now had a conscience. Why? They're with knowledge. Now they have a conscience. They know what's right and what's wrong. Why? They have something to compare the two. Isn't it interesting? Verse 7, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Instantly they have the knowledge of good and evil, right after they eat the fruit. First thing they realize, we're naked and we shouldn't be. This is bad. This is wrong. I've got to cover myself because I'm ashamed. Why is that? Now they have a conscience. Now they're with the knowledge of good and evil, and the fact that they were naked shows them this isn't good. I need to change this. What's that? That's their conscience speaking to them. I find it interesting that once they had the ability to know good from evil, they knew being naked was bad and they covered themselves up. You realize babies don't care if they're naked or not? Toddlers and stuff, they see nothing wrong with it. Why? They're innocent. They don't have that knowledge that maybe I shouldn't run around with nothing on. But then whenever you get older, that shame comes in and you go, oh, I need to cover up. I need to dress up. Until you get older and your conscience gets seared and you start saying, maybe it's not too bad to be showing off some skin. Maybe it's not as evil as what it was whenever I started knowing the difference between right and wrong. And now I can show some cleavage. I can show some leg. I can strut around a little bit and tease people. What's that? A sign that the conscience isn't working as well as what it used to. Something's damaged that conscience. Every adult should know that being naked in front of other people is wrong, but something happened to their conscience. And I do want to point out this is the first instinct that appeared when man and woman realized the difference between good and evil. So it's not that it's okay for the men to be naked, but the women can't. Both of them realize this isn't good. We need to cover up. So see, Adam and Eve can now identify what was evil, but they could also identify what was good to do. So it's not just conscience, oh, shame, shame, I'm not supposed to do this, I can't do that. You realize your conscience works both ways? It encourages you to do good, and it also discourages you from doing bad. So how do you know? Look at Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. So they got kicked out of the garden, the end of Genesis 3. Genesis 4:1. And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. So they had their first kid. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. They got two boys. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. Let me ask you this. When did God command Abel to sacrifice unto him? He did. When did God tell Cain, you need to bring me a sacrifice and you better make this happen? He didn't. They have a conscience now. They know that God is there. They know that God should be worshiped, and sacrificed unto. He should be praised. He should be acknowledged. He should get the best of what we can produce. They had this knowledge of what was good. Where'd they get that? It could be that, Adam and Eve were telling them about God and everything, and I'm sure they did. God wasn't a secret right then. But they had something inside of them that's telling them this is good to offer to the Lord. Even Cain, he's got this wicked heart. He's upset. He hates Abel. I mean, he kills him shortly in the next couple of verses. But he still had it in him to say, you know what? God's worthy to be getting what I'm trying to offer him. That's his conscience speaking. There's a part within each and every one of us that makes us feel as though we owe God something. That's part of our conscience. As a matter of fact, we still owe him everything. That's why we get verses like Romans 12:1. You'll understand those are some of my favorite verses. I mention them a lot. Romans 12:1 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. It's reasonable to give to the Lord everything you got because he gave you everything you got, including yourself. So your conscience leads you to determine the difference between good and evil. And like I say, it works both ways. Your conscience leads you towards worshiping and loving God. That's something your conscience bears witness to. You realize man still has a conscience today. You might not believe it, but everybody still has a conscience today. Let me show you what happened to most of them. You might want to keep a marker here. We'll probably be back, I imagine. Turn to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. If you wonder why the world is in such a mess today, all you got to do is read Romans chapter 1, and you'll know exactly why we are at where we're at today, because the Bible tells us a progression of degradation, if you will, that happens, and the first step we're going to look at, we won't go through all of them, but if you read through the end of the chapter, you will see it goes from starting off where it starts off, which is not retaining God in their knowledge, and you'll find out it goes to lusting after the opposite sex, a lot of fornication going on there, and that turns to homosexuality, and it turns into all these other things, and then embracing and tolerating sexual sins, and then celebrating sexual sins. And that's where we're at today. Romans chapter 1, verse number 18. Romans 1:18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. So these people know what's right, but they're living unrighteously. So they have a conscience. It's saying this is wrong, but I'm still going to do it. Why are they that way? Verse 19. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. God's the one that told them it was wrong. If you're living a lifestyle that you know is right and good and pure, why do you have to prove to everybody else that it's acceptable? You shouldn't have to. But you feel compelled to because you want someone on your side because God's already revealed it to yourself that this isn't right. I know the way I'm living is wrong, and so I want to get a group of people to agree with me and comfort me in what I'm doing that I know is wrong because I don't want to feel so bad about it. If you know it's right, it doesn't matter if people disagree with you. You don't have to go and prove them wrong. You can just say, well, they don't understand. But I know what I'm doing is right. So they got God showing it unto them. Verse 20. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Do you realize that there's no such thing as a true atheist? Someone has to be trained to be an atheist. You don't start off being an atheist. Basically, those that are claiming to be atheists are simply those that reject the God that they know exists. Why do you think they get so mad whenever you talk to them about God? Why do they fight to take God out of our society? Why do they get irritated with "in God we trust" on the money? If there's no merit behind our belief, why would they get mad about it? It's because for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, that's all of us, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. God not only made them, but God let them know that he made them. They're without excuse. They know there's a God. Look at verse 21. Because that when they knew God, who knew God? Everybody. All the ones that were made by God. That's the one that know God. Everybody. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, became fools. So, verse 20, for the invisible things of him, that's God, from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, that's people, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So God gave us the ability to know right from wrong and to guide our moral compass. He gave us all a conscience. And that conscience lets us know that there is a God. You know why people get mad at you whenever you witness to them and tell them about Jesus Christ and you tell them about the Lord and things like that? Because the Bible says, in the mouth of two or three witnesses, every word shall be established. Okay, so there's power when there's two or three witnesses together. You telling them about the Lord, you become at least the second witness to the Lord. The first one being their conscience. They already know that there's a God that they're ignoring. If they're honest, they try to seek him out and find out. They might not understand. Listen, whenever I say they know that there's a God, I'm not saying, I know that there's God in heaven that created the earth in 6 literal days and he sent his son Jesus Christ. They might not know a whole lot about God, but they know that whenever they hear in school that we all came from a cosmic burp billions and billions of years ago, and everything came from nothing, and in the beginning there was nothing, then it exploded, and then there was a gas that's swirling around, and then rocks, and then water from somewhere, and then there was ooze, and then from the ooze came swimmy things, and from the swimmy things came bigger swimmy things, and then one jumped out on the land that came from nowhere, and they understand whenever they're hearing that, they're going, are they serious? There's a witness inside of them that lets them know, I came from somewhere. This is no accident. They know. Look at Romans chapter 2, verse 14. Romans 2:14. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature, naturally, right? Do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves. So these are Gentiles, these are non-Jews that are doing things God's way without the law. They're following God's will without having the law to know exactly what God said. How would they know how to do that? Verse 15. Which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing what you're doing wrong, or else excusing one another. So it's built in each one of us, this conscience that lets us know that whenever we follow what God wants us to do, whether we know the Bible or not, we know that's a good thing. We know it's right. Our conscience is bearing witness by the law that God wrote in our heart. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 4, if you would. Keep going to your right there. 1 Timothy chapter 4. We got this law written in our hearts that's knowing right from wrong. Our conscience bearing witness to us. You say, why don't I see that a lot anymore? Why aren't we seeing people with good consciences? 1 Timothy 4, verse 1. Now the Spirit speaketh expressly. That expressly, that means in direct terms. That means plainly. Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. They've had outside sources that they've been messing around with that's been seducing them to do things that God does not want them to do. They've been taught things, doctrines of devils. They've been taught things by people who do not love the Lord, that do not want people to follow God, probably because they are already going against God, so they're trying to recruit others to go against God. What's that? Doctrines of devils? Help me feel better about my sin by partaking in it with me. That's what we got going on. Verse 2. Speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. Why is the world so wicked today? Because they have a seared conscience. They've had so much support. They've had so much doctrines of devils. They've had so much encouragement to go against God. Now it doesn't bother them to go against God. And I want you to understand, it becomes easier to have your conscience seared with each passing generation. Kids go beyond the bad that their parents do. Unless they get right with the Lord and they get just gung-ho, naturally, if grandma and grandpa say, nope, we don't drink. Drinking's awful. It's bad for you. It'll destroy families. I know this family. It was wrecked by alcohol. We're not going to do that. Me and my wife, we're not going to do that. That's what Grandpa said. Then Dad comes along and he goes, well, I know what my dad said, and he said drinking's awful at all cases, but, a little wine on our anniversary is okay, and so long as you do it at home and you're not, drinking and driving and everything, in moderation, it's okay and everything. What do you do? Go just a little bit further. And then the kids come along and they say, drinking must not be bad. I see Dad do it. Dad's thinking, hey, it's just on occasion. I'm doing it responsibly. The kid goes, that is my green light right there. I see Dad doing it. It's okay to do it. I can do it as much as I want. And then grandkids come after that and they say, well, drinking's okay. I guess all these drugs and stuff like that, I'm just trying to feel good, right? What is it? And it gets worse and worse and worse. Why? Because way back when, someone did something that was against the Lord, and it just magnified from there. Your conscience goes hand in hand with the ability to discern right from wrong. Why do you think that there's so many people today that are pushing for things like situational ethics? You know what situational ethics are? Well, in certain cases, that's okay. Well, it's okay for me to cheat on my wife because years ago she cheated on me, and so that really means it's okay, or it's all right for me to do this because this person did that to me, and if the situation, no, if cheating's wrong, it's always wrong. It doesn't matter who did it first. It doesn't matter if you feel vindicated for going back and getting back at them or whatever it might be. You're not justified to do wrong under any circumstance. But if your conscience has been seared, you make excuses for the wicked that you want to do. society pushes for things, you see it now, especially in colleges. How about no absolute truth? Well, that's your truth. It's either true or it's not. What do you mean, your truth? Well, my truth is that he is really a she, and she wants to be called this. And well, truth is that was a man born as a boy and grew into a man, and he's still a man. That's that's truth. Well, that hurts feelings. Feelings is not truth. There's a difference. So we've got these individuals here in this 1600-year period that have a conscience. They they know that they're supposed to be obeying God. They've got a desire and a drive to obey God. They know from inside. I know this is wrong. I shouldn't do it. I know worshiping the Lord is right. I should do it. Well, what happened? Let's turn back to Genesis. See, I've mentioned in this dispensation study that there is a test or a command given by God towards man during this time period. And in a sense, that command was don't eat of this particular tree, one rule, one test. Now, men and women during this age have a conscience, and the test given by God, instead of God specifically stating do this or don't do that, he leaves man to choose to do the good by himself. He knows there's a God. He knows that there's a desire in that man to worship God. So God says, okay, let your conscience be your God. You ever hear that? Let your conscience be your guide. Man knows right and he knows wrong. The test is, will he choose to do right? That's the test during this dispensation of conscience. God gave men and women jobs to do. Men are supposed to make the living out in the cold, hard ground, work and provide hard for their family. Women are to bring forth the children in pain, be subject to the man. We talked a little bit about that. I want you to understand both of these are full-time jobs. They can follow in what the Lord's already given them to do full-time. But man still finds free time and he messes things up. Idle hands are the devil's plaything. Man should have stayed busy and stayed out of the trouble. But we see a test failed by man. Look at Genesis chapter 6. Genesis 6, we see what happens whenever you just let your conscience be your guide. Even if you know God and you know you're supposed to worship God and you know what's evil, will people choose to do right and not do what's wrong? Genesis 6:5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. So here for 1600 years, the Lord has been sitting there patiently waiting, hoping that they're going to sit there and choose to do right instead of do wrong. And it gets so degraded in that time, from a time whenever people walked with the Lord in the cool of the day, when God was speaking to them on a regular basis, to now it's their thoughts are only evil continually. They don't think of God at all. He's no longer on their radar. Their conscience is so seared, they don't have any God-pleasing thought that comes in their head. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be the coming of the Son of Man. The Lord's going to come back, and this is going to be the condition of people. Their thoughts are only evil continually. We're not far from it. We're not far from it. Look at verse 11. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. So their thoughts are wicked, they're doing violent things, and they're corrupting themselves. Now obsessed with wickedness and violence. They're corrupting themselves. This is man failing the test of God again. But next we have the judgment of God. What does God do because of this? Well, we read it there in verse 7. The Lord said, I will destroy man. Well, we might not have read that. Verse 7. And the Lord God said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping things and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. Look at verse 13. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Chapter 7, verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, of the 17th day of the month, the same days were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Verse 18. And the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went up upon the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. The judgment of God during this dispensation, the rain that came and the water that went forth and flooded out the whole, all the land and air dwelling creatures. That is, except for one man and his family and the animals that were on the ark, which brings us to the grace of God dispensed at this time. God spares the only man alive that can be considered righteous by the Lord. It says in verse 8 of chapter 6, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. How did he do that? Well, we have someone here that was choosing God and following after righteousness instead of thinking evil. He was still following his conscience. He was worshiping God and still choosing to do what was right. How do we know he was doing right? Turn all the way to 2 Peter chapter 2. Way back there, just a little bit before Revelation. 2 Peter chapter 2. Let's look at verse 5. Peter, speaking of Noah, said this. 2 Peter 2:5, verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. God not only spares Noah and his family, but he is patient while waiting for Noah to build the ark. So we got one good guy, we got one good family there that God's going to spare them, but his grace didn't stop at just Noah. His grace was available to everybody on the world at that time. It wasn't that Noah was the elect and he was the special one. No. Look at 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3, look at verse number 20. 1 Peter 3:20, which sometimes were disobedient when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is 8 souls, were saved by water. So I'm missing the reference that he preached for 150 years, I believe it was. I didn't have that one written down. I apologize there. But he was a preacher of righteousness, and he preached for at least 100 years. Anybody know where that reference is? Is that close to 2 Peter? Is it Jude? Does Jude mention that time there? Or is it 120 years? Where's that reference, do you know? Jude 14? No, that's not that one. Oh well. We'll find it later. Take my word for it. I can prove it later. There was 100 years because the ark was preparing. It took Noah over 100 years to build the ark. During that time, he's a preacher of righteousness. He's going around telling people what the Lord's judgment is going to be, that they need to acknowledge the Lord, they need to worship the Lord, and they, they need to get on the boat. But they rejected, they refused. God's grace was available to everyone, but only one guy and his family accepted it. God dispensed his grace by being long-suffering. God would have allowed more people into the ark if they would have just repented before the rain came. Why else would Noah have been preaching to them? You realize pride has always been the dominant factor that keeps men from getting saved? Oh, that nut job, Noah. Yeah, building a boat. It hadn't even rained before then. That was the first rain on the earth, was Noah's flood. And so he's talking about water coming down from the skies, and they're going, what? No, 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 it comes up from the ground. You know, it's that mist all the time. And they laughed at him. They mocked him. But God allowed Noah 100+ years to be able to witness to them, to try to reach them. They all rejected. So they died. So the recap on the dispensation of conscience: the test by God, knowing good and evil and choosing to do good. The failure, the imagination of their thought of man's heart was only evil continually. They rejected God. They would not listen to the preacher. They wanted to live in their sin. They only thought of wickedness. The judgment, worldwide flood. The grace for obedience to God, they get to be spared from that wrath and from that judgment. Noah got in the boat. Him and his family, they were raised above it by the grace of God. They were spared. They were delivered, and now they get to start over being the first family in the new world. They get it. Why? God dispensed his grace that way to them. God no longer says, follow your heart. With good reason. It didn't work back then. Why would it work now? We're seeing this happen again now. Why would God command us now in the church age to say, hey, just follow your heart, just choose to do good? He knows how that ends in a worldwide flood. He's not telling us to do that now. Now he says, repent and come to Jesus Christ. That's what we got to do now. Why? That doesn't work. 1,600-year experiment proved that doesn't work. Why? The thoughts of our heart was only evil continually. Jeremiah 17:9, for the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? God knows it. He doesn't say follow your heart. He says follow Jesus Christ. I'm going to stop there tonight. Any questions on this dispensation here?